Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, March 20th, 2014. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. This week, Chris Colby of Beer and Wine Journal shares his long-term strategy of brewing and blending a homebrew sour. Also, using a neutral yeast strain to boost the pitching rate of yeast with more character. If you're new to home brewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. You can find me on Twitter. I'm Basic Brewing, all one word. On Facebook, I am at facebook.com/basicbrewing.james. We have a show page on Facebook as well at facebook.com/basicbrewing. We're on the Google Plus as well. And thanks again to everybody clicking on the Amazon.com associate link on our basicbrewing.com site. You know how it works. Whenever you think of shopping on Amazon, go to our website first. Click on our ad. That will take you to Amazon where you can shop as you normally do. And you won't even notice the difference. But we will, because we get a cut of whatever you buy. We also have associate links for Brew Your Own magazine and the American Homebrewers Association on our site too. You can find our Basic Brewing iPhone app on iTunes and our Android app on the Amazon.com. The Amazon.com. I'm getting old. And we're on the BlackBerry podcast directory too. We're on the Stitcher app. We're on the Windows Phone directory. All over the place. Check out our brewer's logbook at basicbrewingshop.com. In the front is a blank calendar that you can use to track your fermentations and plan your brews. And there is a room in the back to log the details of up to 50 batches of beer. If you want to put a tip in our tip jar, some coinage in our guitar case, you can go to basicbrewing.com/support. And thanks to everybody who has done so already. Protect your precious beer with one of our growler bags. Check those out at basicbrewingshop.com. There is a new thing on our store. We've been using the cool bottle opener from the Barley Legal Homebrew Club on Basic Brewing Video. And a bunch of you have asked where you get one of those. Well, I'll tell you where you can get one of those or something similar. We now have one of those cool bottle openers with our logo on it. It is white with a black Basic Brewing podcast logo on it. It is very sharp looking. Go to basicbrewingshop.com to check it out. There's also a little video on that page to demonstrate it if you haven't seen it. And we'll also be featuring the opener on the Basic Brewing Video episode that I'm planning to post on Friday. And to sweeten the deal, I've upgraded our DVD combos to include a free bottle opener for a limited time. Now, I haven't ordered very many of these, so they may very well sell out before I can get some more, so I don't know. Anyway, enough shameless plugging on the stuff, at least the stuff that costs money. Something free, the video episode that I'm posting at the end of the week, will feature my speedy brewing session of an all-grain, small-batch stout. I was able to brew the beer in 2 hours and 45 minutes. Not too shabby. And it's a tasty beer, too. That's a follow-up to the speedy extract brew that Steve and I did on the previous video podcast, in which Steve was able to brew his beer in 45 minutes, 46 minutes? So, very, very fun, very interesting stuff. And on the topic of speedy brewing, Nate writes in with this. Nate says, I just watched your fast brewing video, and it was very similar to the method that I use when I'm making a 2.5-gallon batch of beer. One thing that I found, which staves off a fair amount of time, is that I do the boil as a partial boil and keep the rest of the water, maybe 1.5 gallons, just above freezing in the back of the fridge. That way, instead of doing an ice bath, I just dump the 34-degree water, and the temperature is almost instantly dropped to where I need it. I suppose you could use sanitary ice to do the same thing as well. Maybe you could get your time down below 30 minutes. Well, that's a good tip, especially for batches larger than the 6-pack batch that we brewed. Dan wrote in after hearing the discussion with our Icelander friends about brewing in plastic buckets with heating elements in them, electric heating elements. Dan says, "Hey, James, I'm a Yank studying in the UK and can report that a plastic bucket with a heating element is the standard kettle included in most beginners' homebrew kits. Like you, I was surprised when I first saw it. Apart from the hot wort making the plastic perilously flexible, it's a pretty handy setup here in Edinburgh where there's little outside space and kitchens are very small. Just thought I'd let you know." That's cool. Other than the perilously flexible part of it. Very interesting. It's always fun to hear about how home brewing is taking shape in different areas of the world and how people rig things to work with how they can brew and live. Okay, let's get to our conversation with Chris Colby. Chris is still hammering out awesome articles for beerandwinejournal.com. Recently, he did a short series on brewing Gueuze, or I think he pronounces it at times something like Gueuze. And by the way, I'm looking forward to your help in that pronunciation. Chris's approach takes a bit of patience, since it's an investment of a few years of work. Chris Colby, welcome back to Basic Brewing Radio.
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on the show.
You are a bit under the weather, coming out of a bout with the flu, and I'm feeling kind of like I might be going into a bout with something. So if our conversation is a little short today, maybe people will understand. We're playing sick.
Yeah, this is going to be a great episode.
Yeah, and there's nothing like there's nothing like soothing tummy troubles like talking about sour beers.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing sounds more appetizing than a nice, crunchingly sour beer.
If you're concerned about the amount of stomach acid that you have, just have a sour beer. Oh, so we're talking about you wrote a series of articles along with a recipe on beerandwinejournal.com on, I'm going to say Gueuze, but there's another way of pronouncing it.
Yeah, there's at least a couple ways that people pronounce it. One is Gueuze, and another sounds at least something like a Huza. And I've heard both of those pronunciations.
We're talking about Gueuze, which sounds like a good words with friends word. So this isn't a beer that you can knock out and enjoy, just a few weeks later, like your normal beers. From reading your articles, it looks like it takes a bit of planning.
Yeah, it's Gueuze is a blended lambic. It's usually a blend of old and young lambics, and so you basically, commercially, it's usually a blend of old lambics, which are 2 to 3 years old, with some young lambic, which is a year old, thrown in. So if you're starting today on making a lambic, you're not going to be able to drink it for a few years. You've got at least 3 years to brew, or 3 years to age some lambic, and then you've got an additional at least 9 months of letting it bottle condition. So it's a big project for a home brewer.
Why do you need to blend? Why can't you just use 1 year's worth?
You can make lambic at home and then just package it, and you could do so after. Kind of depends, but you could probably let a lambic age for about 9 months after brewing it and have it be pretty good. But the idea behind blending a Gueuze is you take the different characters of the old and young and blend it together to make something better than the sum of its parts.
So some people refer to homebrew lambics as pseudo lambics because they are, a traditional lambic. In the old ways, in the old country, you just you put your wort out, exposed it to the air, and let the bugs do the trick. The ambient bugs, so to speak, not real insect bugs, but critters floating around in the air. But we don't have the luxury of doing that. But we can buy those critters, those yeasts and such as that, and put them in our beer and not have to be concerned that we've got anything crazy floating in the air around our house.
Yeah, a lot of people use the term pseudo-lambic or P-lambic. I don't know. I think it's a little clunky. I mean, if people want to use it, that's fine. I think when you're talking to homebrewers about homebrewed lambic beer, that just context, it makes it clear that it's not a commercially produced lambic from Belgium.
Although we've had a homebrewed, quote unquote, spontaneously fermented lambic here on the show that was really tasty. So it is possible. Maybe there's some luck involved. Maybe people shouldn't be as afraid of it. I don't know. But you're going the sort of American traditional homebrew way and using store-bought microorganisms.
Yeah, when I brew lambics, I use either both White Labs and Y Yeast have their lambic blends, and I've usually used not usually, I've always used either one of those blends, which is the easiest, or occasionally I've bought the individual. They also sell individual cultures of the various organisms, and you can pick and choose which type of Brettanomyces you want, because there's several different strains, and you can there's really only one strain of lacto and PDO, but you can try to grow those up on your own if you want. And it's you can also you can try to spontaneously ferment it, and they're one of the things that you might want to try to do if you're doing that is make some wort, make a lot of find a lot of like very little vessels and set them out and let them all sort of ferment on their own, and then sort of taste them all after a short amount of time, and whichever ones don't taste just absolutely foul, use that as a basis of building up a culture, because it just stuff that things that are in the air, there's a lot of different microorganisms that are really just going to lead to ultra foul tasting beers, and a little bit of selection helps. Like in Belgium, obviously they've been doing this for a long time, and they while it's true that the wort gets inoculated at lambic breweries in the cool ship, it's a big, wide, shallow vessel where the wort cools overnight. It also gets pumped to barrels after that have been used in previous years for lambic fermentation. So even though they're cleaned, they still harbor the microorganisms, and they use barrels that have produced good beer before get used again. Barrels that end up producing off-flavored beers, don't get used again. So there's some selection there. It's not just a straight, let's leave the windows open tonight and see what happens.
You address some sour myths, and one of those myths has something to do with contaminants left over in brewing equipment. And some brewers, home brewers, are kind of nervous about brewing sour beers because they don't think that they can adequately clean the stuff that needs to be cleaned, and they might just be able to brew nothing but sour beers from then on.
Yeah, that's a common worry. People, homebrewers will think that, well, if I brew this once, I'm running the risk of, if not every one of my beers turning out sour, but having a, sort of a recurring problem with sour beers cropping up from time to time. And that the experience of a lot of homebrewers who make sour beers just shows that that's not the case. You can take a couple common sense precautions to make sure that that doesn't happen. One is if you ferment in stainless steel or glass, both of those can be cleaned, and in hard plastic. Those can all be cleaned, and sanitized, and you don't have to worry about that. If you the soft parts though, like rubber stoppers, tubing, and all that, you're probably best. I mean, you could clean them probably, but just as a safety, or just as a way to be a little bit more prudent, you could just sort of dedicate a set of the soft stuff to your sour beer brewing. All the stoppers are cheap. The tubing for racking is cheap. And so, and most homebrewers probably have, an old wrecking cane that they're just about to retire anyway. So just dedicate a set of that to your sour beers. And also just, if you can, don't have your sour beers sitting around like right where, wort that you've just made and cooled is. You use a little sense about the proximity of that. But generally, I've never heard of a home brewer who has started to brew sour beers and then had a recurring problem with, continued contamination of all their subsequent beers.
You need to adequately clean your soft parts.
Yes.
You talk about a 4-year plan. If in this way of doing it, you are actually planning out 4 years ahead of time, and you've actually done this?
Yeah, there was a stretch in the mid 2000s where I got really into brewing sour beers, and so I brewed sour beers for a couple of years, and I liked it, and I got the idea that I wanted to make a real, Gueuze, and so I set up this plan where I brewed 10 gallons of lambic wort every year. I split the fermentation between 2 buckets. One of the buckets was dedicated to go to the Gueuze, and the other bucket I would use the next year to make a Kriek or a Framboise, or I think some years I can't remember always what I did with the second one. I think some years I might have just packaged it up as a young lambic, and yeah. So anyway, the idea was I made 10 gallons of wort, split it between 2 buckets. One bucket was saved for the eventual Gueuze blend, and the other one got turned into a fruit lambic the next year. And so basically, like the first year, you have your 2 buckets. The second year, you save 1 bucket and you brew another 2. The third year, you've got 2 older buckets, one that's 2 years old and 1 year old, and you brew another 2 buckets. And on your fourth year, the year that you actually blend it, you have a 1, 2, and 3 year old buckets of lambic. And then, it's up to you if you want to try to keep the ball rolling and brew another 2. But yeah, it's in the fourth year is finally when you get around to blending it, and then it's not till it's bottle conditioned that you get to drink it. So it's you're looking at a beer that if you go out today and say I'm going to start this project, it might be 5 years till it comes to fruition.
It sounds kind of familiar if people have listened to our Solera shows, where you have one or more barrels, and you essentially take a portion out of one barrel, put it into the next barrel, take a portion out of that, put it into that, and so you're kind of putting fresh beer into these barrels and then taking it out the next year and replacing it with replacing part of it with fresh beer. Although in this case, each bucket is going to have nothing but that single vintage, as it were. So that gives you better flexibility on making a blend because you've got the pure beer from each of those years.
Yeah, when you blend a Gueuze, it starts with you're not sort of continually blending as you are in a Solera project. You've brewed it whenever it does, and it's sat for either 3 years, 2 years, or 1 year when you get to the time to blend.
So let's talk about blending. What are the strategies? What are the characteristics of the beers that you've got? I mean, what are the likely? I mean, I guess one thing is with sour beers, they can't be completely predictable. But what are the characteristics that you are expecting for like a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 1-year-old?
Yeah, generally, if you use cultured microorganisms, you can't always predict what you'll get with a sour beer, but they really are pretty good at making a relatively consistent product. I mean, if you're trying to spontaneously ferment things, then you've added a whole nother dimension of unpredictability. But with cultured microorganisms making sour beers, I've had pretty good luck. I mean, I can't really think of a beer that's gone like so far off that I ended up pouring it. There've been some that have been better than others, but you get a pretty decent consistency. And what you'll find generally is that the beers are going to become more and more sour over time. So with a 1-year lambic, you expect it to be, it will have, aged for a year. It'll be fairly sour, but it'll still have some small amount of residual body and sweetness to it. And 1-year lambics generally don't have a lot of the Brettanomyces characters, the sort of the barnyard, hay or horse blanket kind of stuff. Those tend to be a little bit muted in a first-year lambic because those are produced by the Brettanomyces with extended aging. So you get the first-year lambic is sort of straight sour with just a little bit of the lambic funk that people look for, and then the third-year lambic, I'm skipping over the second year for the time being, that's going to be the most sour of the. It's going to be very dry. It's going to be very sour, and it will likely have a pretty good level of lambic funk in it. And then the second year should be intermediate between those two.
So I guess is the blending strategy simply a matter of taste?
Yeah, there's a couple different ways you can approach it. The way I did it at the time, because I really at the time I had no idea, is I just blended the full volume of all three together. And there's some benefits to that. One is it maximizes your volume. If all three of the beers basically tasted good, you're gonna, not have a terrible blend, but you'll probably have a very good blend, in fact, and you maximize the volume of your beer. But a little bit more sophisticated way of looking at it would be to taste the three beers and think about what you're looking for. And a couple different possible blends would be, one would be one where the third-year lambic dominates the blend, the very sour, very dry, 3-year-old lambic with smaller amounts of the 2-year-old lambic blended in, and then just enough of the young lambic to sort of set the edge off. That can be a very good blend. If you aren't a fan of just the, absolutely, punch in the face sour, you might want to instead go with a blend that's dominated by the second year lambic. Uh, you know, blend the second year lambic, add in just enough 1 year to sort of add a little bit of body to it, and then blend in enough third year lambic to hit the level of sourness you want, and and to dry it out a little bit. One thing you probably would never want to do is make a Gueuze with the and I think I'm pronouncing the word differently every single time I say it. You probably wouldn't want to make a blend that's dominated by the first year. For one thing, just from a practical sense, why age those other lambics 2 and 3 years just to drown it out with a young lambic? But you would also, when you bottle it, it would be more unpredictable in the bottle. It would have more, residual extract in the beer, and it would have more of a chance of becoming like a bottle bomb.
And that was my next question. I mean, do you have to sort of guesstimate based on the blend of the beer, what the level of carbonation or the level of priming that you're going to use when you go in the bottle?
Yeah, you'd prime the beer like any other, but you also have to take into consideration that, and especially the more of the youngest lambic you've got in the blend, that's still going to ferment a little bit over time. And so what I would do, and when I made it, I didn't carbonate it to like commercially, like Gueuzes are carbonated to the level of like a champagne, and I carbonated mine highly, but not quite to that level, because I used sort of heavy 22-ounce bottles to bottle mine in, rather than the champagne bottles that are very heavy glass, and the I've got the shape that holds pressure a little bit better. And what was the question?
Yeah, different levels of priming per blend. I mean, if you do more of a younger blend, maybe less priming sugar, or if you do more of an older blend, older dominated blend, less, or do you have to worry about it as long as you've got a strong enough bottle?
Yeah, the one thing, like, the older your blend is, the more confident you can be that the amount of priming sugar you put in there is going to sort of you're going to accurately end up with the amount of carbonation you want, because in the older ones, almost any usable carbohydrate has been used up, and so you have a little bit more confidence in priming. With a younger, or with a blend with a significant amount of the younger ones in it, you've got more variability, because even though the microorganisms in the lambic blends have been working for a year or 2 years on the younger lambics, they still Brettanomyces will still be chugging along at that point, very slowly, but it'll still be slowly breaking down those carbohydrates, and that can lead to some variability. So, even though commercial lambics or commercial Gueuzes are carbonated to the level of champagne, like, you don't necessarily need to do that as a home brewer. It's not, you can, if you carbonate it to 3 or 4 volumes of CO2, that's still very fizzy. And, it's still very much like a Gueuze. But, one thing, you don't have to put it in champagne bottles, just at that point, just any heavy beer bottle, not the thin-walled beer bottles that are most beers come in, but the old heavy 12-ounce bottles, they used to call bar bottles, or the you can get sort of heavy 22-ounce bottles, and of course also a lot of Belgian beers come in those little 11-ounce beer bottles that are like really super thick glass. Yeah, and those work great, because those aren't going to shatter under pressure.
Talk about the recipe.
Yeah, the recipe for lambic is really simple. It's a wheat beer, uh, and it's uh, usually about 65 to 70% barley malt, and then the rest is wheat. And commercial lambic brewers use unmalted wheat, which is well, wheat that's not been malted. Yeah, and because they use a special kind of mash called a turbid mash. As a home brewer, you don't necessarily need to go through all that just to make a good lambic. What I do is, use barley malt and a mixture of wheat malt and like flaked wheat or torrefied wheat, or you could even go with raw wheat berries. The problem with that is that raw wheat, if you try to run it through your grain mill, uh, because it hasn't been malted, it's very, very hard.
Mm.
It's also malting also sort of expands the seed a little bit, so the unmalted wheat is the berries, quote unquote berries are smaller and harder, and you can it can be very tough going. And I'm not sure, but I would guess that you could probably even break your mill trying to depending on how well it was built. Um, so, so like I said, I normally use some wheat malt and then use either flaked wheat or torrefied wheat, which are raw wheat sources for brewing. And lambic brewers tend to use soft white wheat. Um, in contrast, like German Hefeweizens are usually the hard red wheat is usually, uh, what they use for brewing, but lambics are usually made with white wheat.
What about mashing strategies and boiling strategies and such as that?
Since lambic brewers use, cracked raw wheat in their grist, they use this complicated step mash called a turbid mash to do their mashing, and you can do this at home if you want, but if you're using flaked wheat and torrefied wheat, flaked wheat or torrefied wheat as your source of raw wheat, you can skip all that and just do a single infusion mash. Um, it sort of depends on some brewers, if they brew a beer like this, will want to do everything as traditionally as possible, and that's cool. But if you are simply looking at producing a wort that's going to make a beer, very much like the one that you've got in your mind, uh, doing a single infusion mash in this case works well. The flaked wheat or torrefied wheat. Flaked wheat is like wheat that's been uh, it's basically sort of crushed between rollers and the heated, so you end up with these little flakes, and these can be stirred right into a single infusion mash, and they'll dissolve, and you don't need to go through like a cereal mash or a long weird extended turbid mash to get them to work. And same thing with torrefied wheat, which is sort of like puffed wheat. Both of those can be stirred right into a mash, and then I usually mash, just sort of for in the range where you would produce a medium bodied beer. A lot of people who brew sour beers, or it was at least a fad for a while to say that, you wanted to make it as much sort of unfermentable carbohydrates in the mix, unfermentable to brewer's yeast, because that'll feed the microorganisms over time. But I find you don't really need to like maximize that. They'll if you mash for like if you mash like 152 Fahrenheit, you'll have plenty of carbohydrates for the microorganisms to live on.
And then how long do you boil?
Um, well, that's interesting. Like one thing, traditional lambic brewers when they get done with the turbid mash, it's a step mash where the temperature is raised each step by a infusion of water. So they end up with a very, very dilute mash, and then they actually sparge with like super hot water, like 194 degrees Fahrenheit, and they collect a bunch of wort. Like they basically over sparge with too hot water because they're looking to extract some tannins, because in the sour beer, and one that's not hopped heavily, it's that they hop with aged hops that don't have much alpha left in them. They want a little bit of tannin to give it, what in wine would be called structure, just a little bit of astringency that actually works well. And what was the question again? I'm sorry.
It's the drugs. It's how long to boil.
Yeah.
So I guess if they're collecting tons of wort, they're going to boil for a long time.
Yeah, they typically boil for 3.5 to 6 hours. In the homebrewed version, now, if you do a single infusion mash, you can sparge hot and collect a good amount, but there's no real reason to make an extended long huge boil. 90 minutes is fine. You'll if you collected a relative lot of wort, you're shooting for a gravity of 12 to 13 Plato, 1048 to 1052. So it's not a huge grist. If you can get a lot of wort out of it and likely be able to boil it down within 90 minutes or maybe 2 hours at the outset.
And what about pitching strategy with the lambic blends? Do you want to make a healthy size starter, or do you want to let them grow in the beer?
You generally don't want to make a starter with the if you're using the lambic blends, because they sort of in the tube or the smack pack, they've got pretty much the right mix of microorganisms in the right proportions, and you'll start to mess that up in your yeast starter. What I would do is either simply pitch the right from the smack pack, or if you feel the need to pitch the yeast at an optimal rate, add just a little brewer's yeast along with the pitch of the lambic blend.
Which brings us to the next thing I want to talk about. There's another article that you wrote on beerandwinejournal.com about extending your pitching rates using a neutral yeast strain. So, first of all, is this something that you would do in this instance? And then, if it is, talk about the technique that you were writing about.
Yeah, well, in the case of lambic, I would do that, sure, because it's not going to hurt anything, and it would you'd get your fermentation going a little bit quicker, and the in the lambic fermentation, the brewer's yeast, or at least when you pitch with a cultured microorganisms, the brewer's yeast dominates the fermentation early on. The lactobacillus and pediococcus, which are the bacterias that lead to souring, and in lambic it's mostly pedio. It's mostly pedio that does the souring. Those are slow growers. They're in biology they're called fastidious growers. They don't grow quickly and multiply. They sort of hang in there slowly. And so basically you let the beer fermentation finish, and then the bacteria will start to work on on souring the wort or beer at that point. And then eventually the Brettanomyces will kick in and start to dominate the fermentation, and at the end, and then that produces sort of the funk of the lambic. So yeah, I haven't done this exactly with alambics. I just pitched the tube or smack pack of blend every year and let it go at that, which also worked fine. But sure, and anyway, the basic idea behind the technique is just if you've got a tube or a smack pack of liquid yeast of some some strain that you like and that has a lot of character to it, like maybe it's a nice estery English strain, or it could be a Hefeweizen strain, or anything that just produces a sort of beer you like with some fermentation characteristics. Let's say that brewing day rolls around, or you suddenly find yourself with a day that you can brew, and you haven't made a yeast starter, and you would like to be able to brew that day, but you don't have the pitch ready to brew. You can extend your yeast count by just using a neutral ale strain. In the case of ales, I haven't tried it with lagers, but I guess it would work. And the basic idea is that you would co-ferment with these two strains, and the strain that produces a lot of character, it's going to still be kicking off all the the esters and other things that it normally would, and then the neutral strain is just going to be chugging along beside it, and it's not going to cover up the molecules produced by the other strain. And really, I found I sort of came across this idea by accident. I was trying at one point to brew, and in retrospect, I'm not sure why, but I was trying to brew sort of a German Hefeweizen, but sort of the dilute down the that particular Hefeweizen aroma, and so I made a Hefeweizen with pitched with half neutral ale yeast and half Hefeweizen strain, and when I tasted it, it just tasted like a flat out Hefeweizen. And so later on, when I encountered a brew day when I wanted to brew one of my beers, but I didn't have a starter, I first thought, well, I'll just have to make a starter and postpone for a couple days. It occurred to me, hey, why don't I just round out the pitch with some neutral ale yeast? And I tried it, and it works. You get the same quick start that you get with a pitching at or near the optimal rate, and you get just basically the same kind of fermentation. The only thing you really need to worry about is that, like, most of the more neutral ale strains, like I've used, the only strain I've actually used this is with the Fermentis US. It was US 56, now it's US 05 dried yeast. The one thing about that is a fairly attenuative strain. It ferments to a little bit lower final gravities than a lot of other strains, and so you're going to change potentially the character of whatever beer you're brewing a little bit. Like I've used this before on my porter, which I usually use Y yeast 1968, the ESB strain, and that's a nice yeast, but that tends to sort of drop out at a fairly high final gravity. And when I made a porter that was co-fermented with the 1968 and the neutral ale yeast, it still had that sort of that ESB strain aroma, which is that strain reputedly comes from Fuller's, and it had that aroma, but the attenuation was a lot lower. The beer was a little drier, and so expect some little changes with that, but in general, I mean, I wouldn't recommend this as something to do every time, but what it's nice for is that, like most home brewers, probably keep a sachet or two of dried yeast in their fridge just in case they run into a stuck fermentation or problems or something like that. And dried yeast is it's at least relatively inexpensive. And if you in a pinch, if you need to brew and either you didn't make a starter, or maybe if you're trying to brew like a huge beer or something, and you would have needed like a 2-gallon starter, but all you had was a 1-gallon jug, so you made 1 gallon of your starter. If you just need to boost your pitching rate, just take the strain that you want, that's going to give you the character in the beer you want, and round out the pitch with a neutral ale strain.
Cool. That's a cool idea. It'd be interesting to hear if people do it with the different yeast strains, what the effects are. But it would be a good idea if you've got, maybe you're not as confident in the vial of yeast, or that you've had it a while, and you're not as confident that it'll do the whole job. That pitching the neutral yeast in there dry could be kind of a confidence factor.
Yeah, it could. If you've got old yeast or whatever, it's liquid yeast, that adds another variable into the whole equation. You might end up with just a plain neutrally fermented ale. But yeah, it can just be, basically, I think one of the biggest reasons to pitch an adequate amount of yeast, there's any number of benefits, but among the biggest one is just that your fermentation gets started in a reasonable amount of time, and that reduces the chance that it gets contaminated, or that any contaminant that is there can take hold and start fermenting and producing off flavors. And you also minimize the risk of a stuck fermentation. You're going to hit your final gravity, blah blah blah. But just just sort of the confidence that your beer is going to start fermenting on time takes a lot of the worry out of brewing, and that's for me one of the biggest reasons of why I either always make a starter, or in a pinch I'll use this to make sure that I'm pitching at a reasonable pitching rate.
Sure. Well, what do you know? We both made it. We stuck with it. Who knows if I'll be conscious enough tomorrow to actually post this interview, but at least we have this in the can. You continue to amaze me with your knowledge, your beer knowledge that you're pouring into the site at Beer and Wine Journal, and I hope it continues. You even play sick, so there you go.
Yeah, I'm so far, I'm having fun. I'm having fun. I think you're having fun doing the site, and I think even better stuff is to come.
Yeah. Hear, hear. Well, thanks, Chris.
Okay. I'm sorry.
I'll fix it in post.
Good. Okay. Thanks, James. There,
thanks again to Chris. I'm glad he's feeling better. My ailment turned out to be very short-lived. So I was feeling a little puny when we talked, but it must have been something I ate or something like that. Or maybe I needed to eat. I don't know. Either way, it was a relief that it wasn't some kind of nastier thing. Enough about my ailments. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. You will now find our new bottle openers on our shop, at least for a limited time. Our Basic Brewing growler bags are still available. Protect your precious homebrew and craft beers. You take it from place to place. Check out our support link where you can throw a couple of bucks into the tip jar by subscribing financially to our podcasts. Be sure to check out our DVDs, Extract Brewing and Partial Mashing, Stepping into All Grain, Low-Tech Lagering and Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kits. You can find them all on our site, along with combo deals on those DVDs to save you a few bucks if you want to buy more than one DVD at a time. And for a limited time, if you buy one of our DVD combos, you get a free bottle opener included with it. You can check out our Basic Brewing shirts in our store, too. Our brewer's logbooks are on the store. Keep track of up to 50 batches of beer. You can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order them online in our online shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We greatly appreciate the support. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are The Way of the Belly, 8 Essential Secrets of Beauty, Sensuality, Health, Happiness, and Outrageous Fun, and Camp Chef Camping Outdoor Oven with 2-burner camping stove. That's cool. Thanks again, everybody, and remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping. We greatly appreciate your support. Don't forget, you can also join the American Homebrewers Association or subscribe to Brew Your Own magazine through the associate links on basicbrewing.com. That's all until next time. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by our buddy Kelly Dodson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.